Hey everyone, welcome to the most opinionated space podcast on the internet, Ad Astra, the podcast where we talk about the intersection between space, policy, and technology. I'm Jack, your favorite space policy advocate, here with a special State of Space Policy episode. Unfortunately, Newton is sick and unable to record this week's episode. I was intending to have this episode be a deep dive into any and all mentions of space or space-related policy in the State of the Union last night. But due to the lack of any of that, and Newton's absence, it'll be a quick episode today. So here are just a few thoughts that I've had since last night. Like many of you, I watched Donald Trump's first State of the Union address. And like many of you, I was expecting a lot more space. Even before the administration took office, space policy seemed to be a focus of theirs. Some of their key advisors during the campaign and subsequent transition have a background in space policy and implored voters turned constituents that the Trump space policy will bring a new direction to the nation's space program. Notably, former Congressman Robert Walker and business professor Pete Navarro led the public relations crusade for that cause. The administration then took a major step in that push for that, quote, new direction for the nation's space policy when they announced the formation of the third iteration of the National Space Council last summer. And with Space Policy Directive 1 at the beginning of December last year, the administration made clear some of its long-term legacy-building goals for the space program. But with the address last night, that all seems to have taken a back seat. As happens all too often in the formation of space policy, other policy areas take precedence. For this administration, it was healthcare, taxes, and now immigration. All three are areas where it seems Democrats and Republicans couldn't differ more. This is obviously a very divisive presidency, and I don't even think that does justice to the divide we see on Capitol Hill and across America. But on a few key issues, it seemed like there was a chance for a bipartisan dialogue. And up until last night, it seemed like Trump and his advisors were trying to leverage the bipartisan nature of space policy to achieve other administration goals. Even a potentially space-related policy initiative that was mentioned, infrastructure, had no concrete goals or defining features beyond a $1.5 trillion price tag mentioned. Space is vital to our 21st century economy and is the impetus for many technological innovations that will bring jobs and prosperity to Americans. I implore the administration, in their push for this infrastructure overhaul, to not forget the $329 billion valuation the Space Foundation gave the world's space economy in 2016, a number that is sure to grow as nations and private benefactors continue to invest in the burgeoning economy. But without clear goals or timetable for this infrastructure initiative, we can't speculate on how that money could be spent to help grow humanity's access and use of space. Uncertainty pervades the big picture space policy discussions all the way down to the very smallest individual participant in the endeavor to explore space. I think it's safe to say that as of recording this show, the chances for Jim Bridenstine and Barry Myers to become administrators of NASA and NOAA respectively are at a low point. Both of these agencies, critical to the success and performance of the nation's civil space program, have gone a record length of time without stable leadership at the helm. As friend of the show and space policy director for the Planetary Society, Casey Dreier said in a recent interview with The Atlantic, fundamentally, an acting administrator is not empowered to make big changes at NASA. NASA needs to have a clear direction, something that Congress seemed to understand when they passed the bipartisan 2017 NASA reauthorization. But that only gets us halfway to the moon, or Mars. Without clear direction from an administrator, our ability to push further into the final frontier is limited by the choices of previous administrations. Now, NASA and space policy have not always appeared in modern State of the Union addresses. Former President Barack Obama didn't mention any real clear direction for space policy until his 2011 address. And even then, of the 6 official State of the Union addresses and 2 inaugural speeches, President Obama only mentioned space in half of them. Going back further, President George W. Bush didn't mention space, exploration, astronauts, and not even Challenger in any of his addresses. I'm sure you all can guess why space isn't always mentioned. All of the U.S. government's civil space activities exist within a fraction of a percent of the federal budget. NASA only accounts for a little less than 0.5% of that budget. Add in all of NOAA and the various other civilian offices that deal with space, and you are still shy of 1%. To appear in the State of the Union requires there to be a real national appetite and political need for a policy push upward and outward. Obviously, from what we saw last night, the administration is not prioritizing space as much as many hoped. And even for those who are and were skeptical of the administration's commitment to this niche policy area, felt disappointed that more isn't being done besides tending to the ship and staying the course. Even with a mention of American footprints on distant worlds less than a year ago at Trump's first address to a joint session of Congress, we haven't gone beyond a few 20-minute announcements, a couple bill signings, and one 3-hour meeting of a National Space Council. It will be February when this episode airs, and we have not yet seen nor heard anything about a follow-up NSPAC meeting. The 45 days that Vice President Pence gave to NSPAC attendees as an indicator for when news on next steps might arrive has lapsed and since doubled in delay and then some. Reports from NASA regarding roadmaps to Mars have not yet surfaced, and the future of programs like Commercial Cargo and Crew are run on a month-to-month basis. In fact, the entire federal government is running on a month-to-month basis. Gridlock between the parties and between the White House and Congress have put the jobs of thousands on the line, and the future and reliability of human and robotic access to space waits in uneager anticipation for the next government shutdown. I'm trying not to be the harbinger of doom and gloom, but this is the situation we find ourselves in the space policy community. I'm not trying to cast doubts on an administration that, for all intents and purposes, showed great interest in advancing agreeable goals for the space program. Sure, I complain often about the nuance of the Moon vs. Mars debate, the ISS, and the space regulatory regime, but that's merely a part of the policy discussion. I have a keen interest in making sure that regardless of administration, party, or ideology, the advancement of our nation into space, for peaceful purposes of exploration and discovery, go unhindered. However, the stop and go of our government and the stop and go of our national space priorities has left me feeling rather dejected and disappointed in an administration that has already set the bar so low. I hope for a brighter future for space policy beyond what seems to be more of an event horizon. We need real leadership in space. The U.S. holds a definitive grasp on the world's space exploration capabilities. Let's not forget that it was a Cold War that sent us into space. Let's not reverse this with nuclear posturing and threat of war that might forever banish us to terrestrial life. The clock strikes eerily close to midnight. We can and have used space to strengthen our relationships abroad and build coalitions within the halls of Congress and down Pennsylvania Avenue. Space policy is more than just $19.6 billion a year and a few neat pictures of Pluto. Space policy is aspirational. To live in a more fair and just society, we must see the big picture. Humanity is imperfect. Injustice still exists. Prejudice, bigotry, and hatred still find home in the hearts of too many. We must continue to fight for what is right, and to that end we need more hope in the world. We must aspire to face challenges and succeed, to accept differences and live in harmony, and to look to the stars and one day fly among them. All right, I'll get off my soapbox now. I've included links to the information I alluded to earlier in the soliloquy. I really hope you consider becoming a member or supporter of organizations like the Planetary Society, Explore Mars, March for Science, Union of Concerned Scientists, and AAAS. I'm sure there are a number of great organizations that I did not mention. So, in the comments on Facebook, please tell us your favorite space or science advocacy organization and why we should join. In other news, be sure to tune in at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time on February 6th to witness the launch of Falcon Heavy. Look out for our reactions to what will be a landmark launch from historic Pad 39A in next week's episode. In closing, we need your voice of support for clear, measured, and meaningful space policy. So please call your legislators, call the administration. Let's do this. Our future might very well depend on it. Thank you for listening. Ad Astra.